Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this one-on-one segment. It's going to be a great one today. With us is Mr. Dalton LeBlanc. You know him from State Farm, but do you know how good of an athlete he was? I had heard stories, and after looking at his resume, he was a pretty doggone good athlete. But there's so much to talk about right after the break. Dalton LeBlanc, right here on One-on-One. One-on-One is brought to you by the Law Office of Waits and Downer. And welcome back to One-on-One. I'm Martin Falls, very pleased again to have Dalton LeBlanc with us today. Dalton, good to see you.
Well, thank you, Martin. Good to be here.
You're synonymous with State Farm. Of course, you've been there, and I want to find out the story of how you even got an insurance, but then we'll morph into those athletic days. Man, what a great career you had, but take me back to the earliest years you can remember. Where were you born?
Born in Houma, Louisiana, and my father was in the insurance business. He was the manager of First National Life Insurance and worked real hard. One of my funnest stories is that Mr. Hebert came in my office to buy insurance, and I thanked him for the honor. He said, "I'm not honoring you." He says, "I'm honoring your father." I said, "Well, please tell me about it." He said, "Well, you remember East Street?" I said, "Oh yeah, I grew up in that area." He said, "Well, it was a rainy day and it was a lot of mud. It was not paved then, and it was pouring down raining. And I think you were in college, young man." And I said, "Probably, sir, And he says, "And your father and I crossed each other. I was going one way and he was going the other. And I looked down at his debit book and he looked at mine. He had a great smile. He tipped his hat to me, and we both acknowledged that we were out there working." He says, "Those are the things that your parents were doing that you didn't know about." Right. And I thanked him for that story. It was just a wonderful story.
When you said debit, my dad worked for Union National Life Insurance.
Right.
So we used to go down East Street, Senator Circle, all those areas. That was his debit area. And to this day, there's still grandmas who live out there that if I'm in the area will say, "Would you like a cup of coffee?"
Right.
They never forget their insurance people.
That's right.
Was your dad similar?
Similar. He was number one manager in his company year after year after year. And some great people worked for him. Former State Farm agent Bruce Clark worked for my father, who was a fine man.
Yeah.
And A.J. LeBlanc down the bayou, he worked for Dad. He worked hard.
Yeah, you were probably a young man when Bruce Clark was our family insurance guy, and even through college, I'd get a good discount for having good grades.
That's correct.
But I mean, when did you start doing the insurance yourself?
Started in 1972. I was working at a university, and I'd given the tour of a campus to a State Farm exec's wife. And she went back and said, "Hey, I met a young man, got a pretty good personality. Y'all need to interview him." So that's when I got a call from State Farm and says, "Why don't you come out and take a look?" And I did. And one thing led to another, and I was coming back to my hometown of Houma. I was offered all kind of management positions with State Farm to move up in the company. But I'm glad I stayed in Houma because it's a great place and it's been a good career. Been 50 years now.
That's an unbelievable task, especially with the changing times. But you brought up the fact you were born in Houma. Take me through your schooling and your high school and everything else.
Actually, I went to Houma Elementary, where the special ed used to be.
Right.
And I walked up those steps to go get my wife many times. And I remember that was the first day of school when I went into first grade. I walked up those steps. So it was kind of a nostalgic thing to go pick up my wife and take her to lunch on the same steps that I'd walked in when I was in the first grade.
Brought back a lot of memories.
It brought back a lot of memories. And now it's a fine apartment complex now. But went to Houma Junior High, then Terrebonne High School, and off to college and got 2 degrees there, bachelor's and master's degree. Then went and ran track for the Houston Striders, went in the Army, ran track for the Army. And after that, I went to Vietnam And then I was working at that university when State Farm interviewed me, and came down here and been around ever since.
Yeah. Vietnam, how tough was that for you?
It was interesting. I was supposed to be assigned to I Corps, where the captain said, don't worry about the VC in their little black pajamas. He says, when they come over the hill, they got hard haps and AK-47s, and it's a hot zone, and you guys are gonna love being up there. About that time, I asked him if he had an administrative job, and he said, yeah. And next thing you know, I was going to the 3rd and 17th Air Cab and became the S3. So I was lucky to get a pretty good job, but President Nixon had taken the handcuffs off the soldiers finally and allowed us to go into the Parrots Beak operation. Many Vietnam veterans remember that. It was a beak-looking piece of property that went into South Vietnam from Cambodia. And all my whole unit and a lot of other units went over there, and we were based out of Tay Ninh, which was called Rocket City, because it was right next to a mountain, and the Vietnam people were constantly shelling the city. And so we based out of there and went in there and took a lot of weapons and got rid of a lot of VC. I've heard through history that if they would have allowed us to continue for a couple of more weeks, we'd have found the VC headquarters. But it was one of the most successful Vietnam campaigns in that war.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. We've all lived a sheltered life when you go to Vietnam or you have an experience like that.
Yeah.
What was that sort of shell shock for you?
It was a scary operation. You know, we had a good operation. I was in charge of the food, fuel, and ammo for my battalion. Mm-hmm. Many times people would call me up and say, we need such and such ammo, and I'd trade it for generators or give them 81 millimeter mortar stuff just to protect the perimeters of some units. So we were all helping each other over there. I'll tell you one thing that's interesting about Vietnam is that I'd gone to school in North Louisiana, which country music was big. It wasn't my favorite at the time. But the one thing I learned about in Vietnam is we used to have some bands that would come rarely to the officers club, and they'd play country music. And when they played country music, we stood up with tears in our eyes, because that's America's music. And we really enjoyed that's where I learned to love country music.
It brought it all back home.
Brought it home.
No doubt. Let me ask you this, when you were going through, I'll go as far back as Homer Junior High or Homer Elementary, going into Terrebonne, when did you recognize that you were a pretty good athlete?
I grew up in East Homer where it was pretty tough. We played tackle football without pads, and I was kind of fast and skinny. Yeah. And they'd throw the ball to me on defense just for the fun of trying to, tackle me. And you got tough pretty quick.
Right.
That's one of the things that we learned in our neighborhood. Yeah. It was challenging.
Yeah. But you were also fast.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I'm gonna start off because Dalton's not gonna read his resume to you, but I will. Okay. And I want to let you know how good an athlete he was. He's synonymous with the insurance business, or you see him around town. But he was the winner of 2 gold medals in the state track meet and awarded Outstanding Athlete of the meet. This is in high school. He was named to all district and all state track teams. He was the best time of any hurdler in Louisiana in his 1962 senior year. Broke every school record in both sprints and hurdle events. Breaks the records in the high and low hurdles at the USL relays and is named the Sports Writers Outstanding Athlete. Breaks records in the sprints and low hurdles in the West Side relays and is named Outstanding Athlete. Breaks the 1955 record of Billy Cannon and the 220 sprint and ties his record in the 100-yard dash, breaks the 1960 hurdle record of Billy Harden, equals the 100-yard record of Joe Labruzzo. Remember that name, right? Named to All-State track team in 4 individual track events, a unique feat in Louisiana track history. 5-time Louisiana state champion in individual track events. Named All-American, first Terrebonne Parish athlete, if I recall, to be named All-American. Winner of 3 gold medals in the Nord State Meet of Champions and named Outstanding Athlete of the Meet. No other athlete in Louisiana track history had won 3 events in the Meet of Champions. Awarded full scholarship to attend Louisiana State University, University of Houston, Tulane University, West Point Academy, and Northeast Louisiana University. And he chose Northeast Louisiana University in Monroe. Before I get to those accomplishments, why did you choose Northeast?
After the Nord Meet of Champions, we drove up to Monroe to look at the school, and met the president and saw where the dorm was. And Northeast had several All-American athletes and a couple of world record holders. And the coach was a pretty good recruiter.
Yeah.
And in those days, Northeast and Grambling and Southern was probably the 3 best track teams in the South. So that's why I chose that school, because it just seemed to be a good track school and something that would maybe help me obtain my dream of making the Olympic team.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. Where'd you get that athletic ability from? Was it your mom's side, your dad's side?
My mother was tall. My daddy was about the same height. They were both about 5'7". Daddy was a baseball player, third base at Holy Cross High School. He was from New Iberia, but he had gone to Holy Cross. It was like going to college back then. Mm-hmm. And the track coach would go talk to Dad and say, hey, look, we got a track meet coming up this weekend. Would you run it? And he would run it, and he ran a 10 100-yard dash. And to give you an idea.
Was that on a cinder track?
That was on a cinder track.
Wow.
That's all I ran on was cinder
That's moving.
tracks. He was good.
Yeah.
And so I inherited some speed. If you inherit some stuff and then you work hard at it, well, you can have some success.
Cinder tracks were brutal, just if you know. I used to high jump on a cinder track and run on a cinder track. It was right in the end of the cinder track day, because my senior year they moved to an asphalt track, but cinder, when you could run a 10-1 on a cinder track,
He was good.
that's smoking.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I think Don Schwab was running similar times on a cinder track.
Right.
All right, so you go to Northeast Louisiana University in Monroe, his freshman year. Best freshman time in America in the high hurdles. Wow. Overall, 3rd fastest time in America of all hurdlers. Conference champion in the high hurdles, low hurdles, 220-yard dash, and 2 relay events. The sophomore year, and you were injured for most of the season.
Yes, sir.
And you came back, you won 3rd place in nationals in the high hurdles. You were named an All-American.
Yes, sir.
How'd that make you feel?
Well, it was good. My teammate also was All-American. He was the 3rd best hurdler in America. When he moved into town from the Naval Academy, we ran and he was beating me. So I said, I don't like placing 2nd. I think I'll go back to the sprints. So that sophomore year was the last year I ran the hurdles, and I wound up doing okay. He was 1st and I was 3rd in that meet. But after that, I'd run the sprints and he'd run the hurdles, and we'd both normally win. And we would bet maybe $5 to who would get the best time. But he was a great athlete.
You could say what you want, but if you had an athlete that was pushing you all the time, you might not have liked it, but it helped you.
It sure did. And that's why I went to that school, because there were so many great athletes there.
It really tests your athletic ability.
It did.
And your potential.
Yes, sir.
Later to come. All right, your junior year, which is 1965, listed in the top 50 track athletes in America. Let me say that again. Listed in the top 50 track athletes in America. Conference champion in the sprints. Senior year, conference champion in the sprints. And in the fall of 1966, your final year of eligibility, you walked on for the football team. Tell me about that.
4 years the track was over with. We were sitting around laying in the bayou, floating around,
You were
having a
bored.
good time. And a guy challenged me to go out for the football team. And I said, I think I will. So I went to see the coach, and he said, sure, here's some shoes, go run a little bit. And I showed up, and unfortunately, I beat him out of his position and wound up being the starting left halfback. I'll never forget, we were going out to the first game, and I was starting, and I said, oh, my Lord, what have I done?
Right.
So it was going to be kind of, I was a little nervous about it, but it wound up being a good career. I was the leading pass receiver on the team.
Yeah.
And I broke on several long runs, and I was just happy to help the team, and it was fun to get my 5th year of college paid for.
But I want to ask you this question, because I've heard this, but I want to make sure it's true. You were drafted by the San Francisco 49ers?
Yes, sir, I was.
Tell me about that.
Well, Steve Spurrier was drafted to be the quarterback, and they were looking for some wide receivers, and they were looking for fast athletes back in those days. John Carlos from East Texas, a lot of people, because they wanted speed. Right. And so they drafted me. And as much as I considered it, I wanted to make the Olympic team. And so I turned it down and decided to run track for the Houston Striders instead of going to the pros.
And you finished 4th with the Houston Striders in a big meet.
It was the Nationals.
Yeah.
And this was all the best sprinters in the United States. And
yeah.
I'd never lost a race all year. But when you got in the Nationals, it was 4th place. I was able to make the USA track team then.
Yeah, what they pick, the first 5?
The first 4 make the U team.
You just made it.
I made
good.
it.
Yes, indeed. That's unbelievable. The 60-yard indoor races across America, you won quite a few of those, right?
Yes, sir.
What was it, for the audience, what's the difference between indoor and outdoor? I know somebody's going to say, well, one's indoor and one's outdoor, but it's a different way of running it.
Well, you're running on boards, like in Madison Square Garden and places like that. And it's an intense situation. Outdoors, there's more wind, there's different tracks and different surfaces.
That's why you hear wind-aided.
Yeah, you don't have wind-aided inside.
Right.
Yeah, no.
I was at a track meet. Coach Albert brought me to a track meet in Shreveport.
Yeah.
One year. I was a freshman. I was high jumping. He said, I'm going to take you to a meet. This guy, a Green, I can't remember his first name, was high jumping 7.2 or 7.3.
Wow.
I never forget on the speaker system, it came on that Herschel Walker, a high school athlete, had just broken the world record in the 100-yard dash at 9 flat. That was the first time I ever heard Herschel Walker's name. For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. This one-on-one program has been brought to you by the law offices of Waits and Downer.